Earlier this month, it was announced that Nico Hülkenberg will be returning to Formula 1. Many fans are a bit baffled as to why Haas would put a driver who has yet to score a podium, much less a win, in 181 starts into the car. And with next year's season being 24 races long, it means that Hülkenberg, assuming he competes in every event, will have run 205 Formula 1 races without tasting the champagne on the top step of the podium. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, the current record for number of Formula 1 races run without scoring a victory is this. And, assuming Hülkenberg is awarded a drive for 2024, it means that he will effectively break this record, a record that has stood for nearly 3 decades. And who might the record be held by? Well, it's held by this guy. Hailing from Italy, he would compete in 15 seasons over the course of his career. He was a fast driver, no doubt, and would turn heads, if not always for the right reasons. Saying he was a bit erratic was an understatement. Like a severe understatement, as we'll come to find out. Towards the end of his career, the number of good drives severely outweighed the number of bad ones that he had, but he could never shake off the reputation that he had accumulated on the first few years on the grid. He won several races in lower divisions, but was never able to quite find success at the highest echelon of motor racing. When you bring up his name, this is what fans think of. So together, let's take a look at a career filled with shunts, damaged wings, and mind-boggling accidents. Let's take a look at Andrea de Cesaris. Andrea de Cesaris was a fast driver behind the wheel, but apart from crashing into just about everything but the pace car, you'd be hard-pressed to find a casual fan that knows really much more about him. And maybe it's warranted. I mean, look at all the records he holds. He jointly or solely holds every single DNF-related record in the sport. How do you manage to stay in Formula 1 for so long? For all the grief he gets for the carnage and destruction he caused, there's a lot more to his career that gets swept under the rug. Born and raised in Rome, Italy, de Cesaris was the son of a tobacco merchant. This will be important later on. He took an immediate liking to motor racing, getting his first go-kart at the age of 13 years old as a birthday present, and competing in karting events, most notably at his home track of Pista d'Oro, a karting stadium in Rome, and a stadium which has seen the drivers such as Elio De Angelis, Giancarlo Fisichella, and even Lewis Hamilton compete there. As his skills improved, he would end up winning the 1977 World Karting Championship. Showing glimpses of talent, this was enough to get him a drive for the 78th season in the BP Super Visco British F3 Championship. Boy, was that a mouthful. Now, this is where I circle back around to de Cesaris' father. Now, his dad had connections with this small tobacco company in Italy. You may or may not have heard of it, they're kind of small. Because of this, de Cesaris was able to convince his dad and the company to sponsor him for basically the rest of his career. His 78th season wasn't utterly remarkable, only scoring 19 points for his team, Team Tiga, and a mediocre 7th place finish in points. At the end of the season, the two organizations hosting races in Britain merged into one, and created a combined Formula 3. De Cesaris and his team stayed in the series with the hopes of winning the title for the next season. And shockingly, they almost did. De Cesaris took home 6 victories and seemed to be the dominant driver. However, a string of avoidable incidents and mistakes dropped him out of contention, including a collision at Oulton Park with Nigel Mansell, sending the future champion into the hospital. He attracted the eye, however, of Ron Dennis, who was looking for a hungry driver to fill one of his Formula 2 seats for the 1980 season. Helped by Marlboro backing, de Cesaris would make the switch to Project 4 racing, where he would do alright with the team, scoring 4 podiums and a win at the Misano World Circuit. He finished 5th in points in F2, besting the likes of Stefan Johansson, and the guy he lost out to in F3, Chico Serra. However, he lost out to Tio Fabi, so was it really all that good? More importantly, that same year, he made 2 starts in the Formula 1 series, for Alfa Romeo, replacing Vittorio Brambilla, who himself was replacing Patrick Depailler, who had tragically passed away in a testing accident for the team. He finished a respectable 8th place in his debut at Canada, but unfortunately in his next race at Watkins Glen, he decided to play follow the leader with Alan Jones and followed him right off the racetrack and into the gravel. Then he crashed with Derek Daly on the next lap and retired from the race. 1981 looked to be his big break. Project 4, Ron Dennis's team, had merged with McLaren. The primary sponsor of McLaren happened to be Marlboro, which was also supporting de Cesaris. That, coupled with de Cesaris' Formula 2 campaign, had impressed the team enough to warrant a seat at the big boys with McLaren. Despite the fact that McLaren hadn't been as dominant in recent years, surely the pairing of the experienced John Watson and the quick yet brash De Cesaris could yield an explosive season. And, well, it was explosive alright, for all the wrong reasons.
And that's De Cesaris. De Cesaris, the Italian driver in the McLaren, has spun off in position. Villeneuve is through, and Villeneuve's lost it. Villeneuve's lost the Ferrari. Off goes De Cesaris.
De Cesaris has gone off. Again.
That's Andrea de Cesaris, the young Italian who makes a habit of going off. He went off twice in practice, and he's obviously out of the race.
1981 was, for all accounts and purposes, an absolute incoherent, nightmarish season for the Italian driver. He crashed a combined 19 times during practice, qualifying, and race conditions. He destroyed 18 car chassis and only managed to finish 6 out of the 14 races that year. His teammate, John Watson, he scored a victory and took 3 additional podiums, achieving 27 points. How did Cesaris do? Try one singular point, a 6th place effort at the San Marino Grand Prix. This all came to a head at the 12th race of the season at Zandvoort. The team atmosphere up to this point had grown toxic, and tensions were running high in the garage. De Cesaris qualified down the order in 13th, but decided his car liked the tire barrier instead. So the team, tired of De Cesaris wrecking all their race cars, refused to rebuild it, forcing him out of the event. In a quote by James Hunt, De Cesaris should really be called Crasherus. He's an embarrassment to himself, his team, and the sport, and maybe he should retire. Andrea de Cesaris was a nickname he could never quite shake off. As the season wound down to a close, De Cesaris was kicked to the curb in favor of Niki Lauda. De Cesaris had angered the team so much that Ron Dennis allegedly vowed to never hire another Italian driver, and credit where credit's due, he's kept his word even to this day. Thankfully, for the 82 season, he was picked up by the team he had made his first starts with, Alfa Romeo, who is also sponsored by, you guessed it, Marlboro. He was partnered with his friend and fellow Italian, Bruno Giacomelli. This year was the year where turbos were a thing, with Renault, Ferrari, and Brabham all utilizing them, but Alfa Romeo opted to go with the naturally aspirated engines instead. Surprisingly, the 22-year-old was able to turn it around slightly in 1982, which isn't really saying much when you look at his 1981 stats. In Long Beach, after shunting it into the wall during practice, he went on to score his first pole position later that day, becoming the youngest F1 pole sitter at the time. He led the race until he decided to play rock, paper, scissors with Raul Boessel's March and forgot to change gear, allowing Lauda to take the lead. Well, at least not all was lost. He could still come back for second. Oh wait, that's his car against the wall, isn't it? His highlight of the year came later on at the 1982 Monaco Grand Prix, also known as the race for second place. De Cesaris, who managed not to crash, put together a bittersweet third place finish. Bittersweet because he didn't actually cross the finish line. De Cesaris' machine instead ran out of fuel on the final lap while in position to pick up his first win. De Cesaris was in tears, quite literally, as he watched his chances of a victory coast to a stop. His only other points would be a 6th place finish later that year at Canada. At the after-ring, Cesaris and Giacomelli's friendship would be tested when the two of them would collide at the start of the race. The two allegedly didn't speak for 2 weeks until the next round at Dijon, where upon seeing the photographs of the crash, Andreas apologized to Giacomelli. I'd also be remiss if I didn't include this battle between himself and Lauda at Caesar's Palace. I didn't actually remember this, but then again, does anyone remember the racing at Caesar's Palace? Unfortunately, those 2 point-scoring drives were surrounded by a whopping 10 DNFs by either mechanical failures or driver error. He was retained by Alfa Romeo for 1983, and the first half of the year was even more of a struggle. The Alfa 183T, while fast, was woefully unreliable, and he retired from 6 of the first 7 races. Alfa's retiring? Now, where have I seen that before? This stretch included the race at Spa-Francorchamps, where De Cesaris put on a stunning display, jumping past Alain Prost and Patrick Tambay at the start, and leading the first 18 laps of the race. However, the team fumbled the bag and had a slow stop. Oh look, it's a bird, it's a plane. It's an Alfa Romeo engine hand grenade that ended his race. After 9 rounds, De Cesaris had 0 points. However, the racing gods descended upon De Cesaris and decided to give him what is known as a gift from the heavens. The 1983 German Grand Prix was taking place at Hockenheim this year, and unfortunately it was quite uneventful, save for Niki Lauda getting disqualified for reversing in the pits. However, for Andrea de Cesaris, he had a great weekend, starting 3rd and avoiding most of the trouble to finish 2nd place. It was his best race up until this point, and perhaps a turning point of things to come. At the penultimate race of the season, he had a solid drive at Brands Hatch, finishing 4th before arriving at South Africa, where he would put in another brilliant drive to jump from 9th to 2nd throughout the race, missing out on the top step of the podium to Riccardo Patrese by just 9 seconds. It was a solid end to the season, which saw De Cesaris score 15 points and score a respectable 8th place finish in points. Surely now with momentum, this would be a sign of things to come? And no. For 1984 and 1985, De Cesaris would sign on with Ligier. The season before, Cesaris for the most part had managed to rein in his urge to bin the car at every corner and produced a half-decent season. However, his 2 years at Ligier was a return to form and probably the darkest years on the grid for him. He didn't crash as often as he did with McLaren in 81, but shunts at Dallas and Detroit certainly didn't help his case. However, even with the fact that the Ligier JS23 was quite dog water that season, De Cesaris managed to ring in 2 good drives, finishing 5th at South Africa and 6th at the San Marino Grand Prix. In 1985, this problem, however, got worse, with the more competitive JS25 being introduced, and Jacques Levitt, the new teammate of De Cesaris, being quick. De Cesaris suddenly found himself on the back foot. This resulted in a string of heavy crashes throughout the first half of the 1985 season, with only a solitary 4th place at Monaco alleviating the pain. The season was beginning to spiral out of control as crash after crash began to plague the Ligier team. And all of this culminated at the Austrian Grand Prix. There is always one moment in a driver's career that is remembered more than anything else. For Nico Rosberg, it was winning the 2016 championship over Lewis Hamilton. For Nico Hülkenberg, it's Brazil 2012 when he lost out on his greatest chance for a win. For Andrea de Cesaris, this race at Spielberg is what most people remember him for. On the first start, Teo Fabi decided to fall asleep on the grid and calamity ensued, resulting in the race restarting again. Andrea was 18th on the grid and had a mellow start to the race until lap 14. His Ligier got loose entering the left-hand panorama curve, and, well, I'll let you be the judge of the rest.
Oh, De Cesaris sideways. De Cesaris on the grass. He's going over. Oh, De Cesaris, a major accident. He's all right. He's getting out. Andrea De Cesaris getting out of the wrecked remains of the Ligier Renault number 25. He got it on the grass and completely cartwheeled. He's walking up.
One of the biggest accidents in Formula 1 history, and the guy walked away with a little mud on his uniform. In an era where driver injuries and fatalities were commonplace, it's a miracle that even up to this point, De Cesaris hadn't suffered an injury yet. When he walked back to the team, he lied to them and said the car had stalled. There was still mud and grass covering him, and when the team eventually saw the replay of their car tumbling and pirouetting through the air, they decided they had enough of him. Guy Ligier stated, "I can no longer afford to employ this man," despite Marlboro paying the bulk of De Cesaris' salary. So, De Cesaris was abruptly fired and was left without a ride. De Cesaris would get another lifeline for the 1986 season with Minardi, but unfortunately it was not much of a lifeline as De Cesaris retired from 14 of the 16 Grand Prix. And in the other 2, he DNQ'd at Monaco and spun off at Mexico and failed to see the checkered flag in both of them. In fact, between the 1985 French Grand Prix and the 1986 Portuguese Grand Prix, he would DNF every single race. A record of 18 consecutive DNFs and a record that will never be broken again. However, with that being said, racing in the 80s and 90s was quite different than what we have today. It was rare back then that the backmarkers could assemble consistent finishes, with the reliability of the top teams often leaving the ones at the bottom in shambles, such as is the case for the next few seasons. With Minardi, both cars always seemed to have a screw loose that year, and neither one could ever seem to make it to the finish properly. However, De Cesaris improved, only having one major off at Estoril that season. 1987, another year, another team, with Brabham signing on for De Cesaris' services. However, this wasn't the Brabham that had done so well with Nelson Piquet behind the wheel. No, this was a slow, mechanically broken Brabham that struggled to get their drivers, De Cesaris and Patrese, to the end of Grand Prix. In fact, De Cesaris didn't see the checkered flag in any of the 16 races run that year, despite scoring points in one round. Now at this point in his career, the wrecks were starting to diminish. Sure, he had a few scuffles this season, but that was a far cry from the 19 times in 1981. Oh wait, I forgot, I didn't mention the race he scored points at. Yeah, that was at Spa. In fitting fashion, De Cesaris started the first lap with a tangle with René Arnoux. As the race restarted, it turned into a race of attrition, with several big-name drivers retiring from the race. Surprisingly, all the screws stayed tight on the Brabham, and come the final lap, De Cesaris was in third position. But he wasn't moving. It turned out he had run out of fuel, so in a desperate attempt to finish the race, he attempted to push his car across the line. Too bad he didn't need to, because all the other drivers behind him were a lap down, but hey, at least he got another podium. Despite the podium, he had been outrun by Patrese for most of the year, and in turn, left to join Rial Racing for 1988. And it wasn't solely because of Dad's money either, although that certainly was a bonus. At this point, de Cesaris had become a more reliable, consistent driver. Sure, he still had his occasional brain farts, but as a whole, the dude was really showing he was a quality driver for any backmarker team. And it showed in 1988. He charged from 12th to 4th place at Detroit, surviving a track that was literally coming apart at the seams, and scoring the team's best career finish. He also was in the points on the final laps of both Canada and Australia when the car realized it was out of petrol and left him stranded. In 1989, the Dallara, Marlboro-sponsored team called upon for his services. The season was promising, with the combined experience of Andrea and the know-how of Dallara. The combo was on course for a podium at Monte Carlo before a shunt with Nelson Piquet left de Cesaris fuming. He made another mind-boggling mistake at the United States Grand Prix, now at Phoenix. Man, F1 in the 80s really couldn't decide on where they wanted to keep a United States track, could they? His teammate Alex Caffey had qualified 6th and had done a masterstroke of racing to end up in 3rd position. That was, until he tried to pass Andrea de Cesaris. The two collided, with Caffey retiring from the race and failing to secure a podium for the team. De Cesaris apologized at the next round at Canada, where he would somehow survive the rain for a 3rd place finish, which was his final podium of his career. The second dance at Dallara was not as clean as the first. The gap between the backmarkers and the midfielders had shrunk for this year, meaning more racing, which of course meant more wrecks. Interlagos, Imola, and Suzuka were all events that de Cesaris had offset. The most iconic moment of his from this year was James Hunt's comment,
Mansell is coming inside, he should know he's there, he's leading the race, and look at this idiot. And it really is a disgrace that he's allowed to continue to interfere.
Alright, be honest. James Hunt absolutely blasting drivers on national television is iconic. At least for me, it was. The hits kept on coming for de Cesaris as he was sacked in exchange for JJ Leto at the end of the year. However, that turned out to be a blessing in disguise as some newcomer team was bursting onto the scene. Eddie Jordan had been racing successfully in the lower formulas now for many years. However, he hadn't gotten a chance to bring his team up to the next level. That was until 1991. Andrea de Cesaris was tabbed as the first driver for the team, with the veteran now bringing over a decade of experience to the role. Jordan hired a few other schmucks to fill out the second car, like Roberto Moreno and this dude named Michael. He doesn't seem that great though. I don't think we'll ever see him win 7 championships. Jordan and de Cesaris were an excellent combination. While de Cesaris picked up 60 DNFs, it was the least he had ever recorded in a single season. In fact, only 2 of them were crash-ending related incidents. It was truly a remarkable season with several great drives, with a pair of 4th place finishes at Canada and Mexico, as well as a 6th at France and a 5th at Germany. But the real piece de resistance, the final absolute brilliant drive of de Cesaris, came to a track he had seen so much success at in the past, Spa. The weekend didn't get off to the greatest of starts for de Cesaris, as he was outqualified by this dude named Michael, who was in just his first Grand Prix start. However, as the race started, de Cesaris used the force and gifted Michael a failed clutch. John Alesi led the race until his engine decided to take a nap, giving way to a quartet of drivers, Piquet, Senna, Patrese, and de Cesaris. Wait, what? Yeah, that's correct. Andrea was battling for the lead of the Grand Prix with 3 of the best drivers of that era. Patrese made a mistake first, and de Cesaris pounced for 3rd. Then, he put on a daring move on Nelson Piquet at Les Combes to snatch away 2nd. Then, he began closing on Ayrton Senna. The gap was getting closer and closer. Andrea was right there, getting ready to give Jordan their first podium in Formula 1. But, as is the nature of Formula 1, some days you're the stick and some days you're the carrot. And on this day, de Cesaris felt the dying sounds of an engine as it expired, leaving the Jordan stranded on the track with a mere 3 laps left and out of striking distance from the race win. Despite a fall-off in performance at the end of the season, de Cesaris went on to finish 9th in the standings, his best finish since all those years ago with Alfa Romeo back in 1983. Eddie Jordan was eager to keep the consistent, reliable veteran in his car, but alas, Jordan found themselves in deep sponsorship woes and had signed on with Barclays Cigarettes, a brand directly rivaling Marlboro. This forced Jordan to release de Cesaris, who would spend his final full-time years on the grid with the struggling Tyrrell organization. His 92 season was comparable to 91, he finished in points 4 times, comfortably beating his teammate. In 1993, Tyrrell regressed and him and his new teammate, Ukyu Katayama, failed to score a single point during the year. In his final season on the grid, De Cesaris started up the year without a drive, before eventually replacing Eddie Irvine at Jordan for several races. However, the reunion was less than suitable, with Andrea riding off one car in testing and another at the San Marino Grand Prix. In his second start with Jordan, he would finish 4th at Monaco. Sauber would sign him on for the rest of the year, and at the 1994 Canadian Grand Prix, De Cesaris would make his 200th career start. It wouldn't end so well though, as he'd retire. He would score his final points next week at France, a 6th place effort, before, in classic Andrea de Cesaris fashion, ending the season with 7 straight DNFs. His final race was round 14 at Jerez, where he retired with throttle issues, and that was the last time we'd ever see De Cesaris line up for a Formula 1 event. There's a reason that Andrea de Cesaris is still known as De Crasherus. His reputation of erratic driving, accidents, and non-finishes were second to none. He raced 208 Grand Prix, the most without a win, and holds the record for the most DNFs in the sport. He once went a whole season without seeing the checkered flag. However, on his day, Andrea was a quick driver with a talent for getting underachieving cars further up the grid than they should have been. He grew into an experienced, reliable driver that any midfield team would be lucky to have. He had bouts of brilliance and bravery that surrounded the moments of madness and mayhem. De Cesaris would pass away in 2014. He was a kind and genuine person whose personality was much different than that in the car. He was a lovely guy who had lived a wonderful, unique life.